This episode is sponsored by Edgewood Nursery, producing unusual edible plants in a regenerative permaculture system in so-called Falmouth, Maine. Check out our online storefront at edgewoodnursery.com/shop and use the code SOULCAST at the checkout for 10% off your order.
Welcome to Propaganda by the Seed, formerly known as Plant of the Month. This project is hosted by the Soulcast. If you'd like to support the Soulcast, you can go to patreon.com/SOLEONE. Today we'll be talking about elderberries. Couple notes about this show. While we were recording, there was some work being done on the house. So there were a couple points where there's like grinding and chainsawing and things crashing and exploding in the background. And that is work happening. So there's a couple edits, and that's why. And before we get into this, we'll hear from some homies in the Channel Zero Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, my name's Eamon, and I'm the host of a show on the Channel Zero network called Radical People. And wouldn't you know it, we're going into the third season. It's a monthly show, so it's really not hard to get extra seasons. But anyway, basically, it's a show in which I interview people who are involved in direct action or direct action campaigns, past or present, and we hear their great stories. Anyway, it's on the Channel Zero network, it's on iTunes, and I'm sure at this point you know how to find a podcast. Radical People. Check it out.
Welcome to the Propaganda by the Seed podcast, formerly known as Plant of the Month. Aaron, what's up?
Oh, not too much. Still winter. It's really, really cold out, and my family is sick. I have so far avoided getting sick, and I hope to keep it that way. But just doing all the normal winter things that I have a never-ending list of, because whenever all this computer stuff or paperwork stuff, and basically anything that should be done indoors comes up during the summer, I just kind of write it on a scrap of paper and throw it in a giant pile of scraps of paper. And then now's the time of year when I actually get a chance to go through those scraps of paper and kick myself for not doing certain things before they became well overdue.
Well, you know, that's quite a interesting system you have here. I just make to-do lists. I put them on the wall and then I just like cross them off so I can like feel a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of to-do lists as well. I basically wouldn't do anything that I was supposed to do if I didn't have a to-do list. I would just get distracted by fun projects.
You have that book, the Encyclopedia of Country Living.
Oh, yeah, that's a great book.
I love that book. It's like a phone book, an old school 9X phone book or whatever. And but one of the first things in there is like, you know, she says like keep lists, keep lots of different lists, make lists. And it's like, it's true. It's like you think you're going to remember everything, but you can't.
Yeah, we have some great pictures in my family photo album of us butchering a roadkill deer. And you can see, like, in the edge of a bunch of pictures, like, the Encyclopedia of Country Living propped open, because we were like, oh, we don't know how to do this.
That's awesome.
What does Carla Emery have to say about this?
That's awesome. Well, so today we are talking about elderberry. Elderberry was one plant that we got a lot of requests from, and it's winter time, and so it's a good time to talk about elderberry. So, we'll talk about elderberry today, and yeah, I don't know. What do you think, man? Why do you think elderberry is a great plant?
Well, elderberry has a lot of great things about it. The sort of property of elder that people seem to be most excited about is its sort of antiviral, antibacterial activity as a medicinal. And the fact that unlike a lot of good medicinals, it tastes really awesome. So it's often really easy to get kids to take herbal medicine if it tastes like elderberry syrup, and maybe not if it's like some bitter tea. And there's a lot of pretty solid scientific evidence to support elderberry as a remedy for colds and flu and shit like that. So that's nice. And there's sort of a real market for elderberry these days. So if you want to grow something in a permaculture system, or grow a real pretty easy to grow perennial crop, elderberry is a good way, something you can actually make a living on these days.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, when I did my first herbal medicine podcast with Stephanie Sison, I think her last name is, what I was like, oh, what are the best medicinal herbs? And she was like, it's not an herb, it's elderberry. She's like, elderberry is the most medicinal thing you can grow. And I had always thought it was echinacea or things like that, but it's actually elderberry. And anytime our kid has been sick, when you talk to, when you have toddlers, you can't give them cough syrup, you can't give them, a whole bunch of shit, but they're always like, well, you can try elderberry syrup, but there's no medical studies that prove it works or anything, but you can try it. And it's and that always kind of blows my mind, because actually there have been a whole bunch of clinical studies done where people compare the healing properties of echinacea, elderberry, and it seems like from what I've seen, elderberry has, if you take elderberry, if you get sick, it'll be for sure a shorter period of time possibly, or if you start taking it when you have symptoms popping up, you could actually stave it off. I mean, is that how you understand it?
Yeah, pretty much. And scientific evidence for herbs is often kind of hard to come by or contradictory, but there does seem to be some pretty real evidence for elderberries, which is cool. Not to say that they're magic. There is nothing that's like a panacea or is going to immediately cure anything. You're just going to give your body an edge, basically. But most of what the pharmaceuticals for flus and colds, they're not going to do anything to shorten the duration of the sickness anyway. They don't make those claims, and that's not what they're intended to do. They're just treating symptoms. So even if elderberry is going to, make your cold go away a little bit quicker, maybe it's a lot quicker even, but that's substantially better than what any of the claims that the pharmaceuticals can make. And you can mix them. There are some herbs that you really don't want to mix with pharmaceuticals, especially St. John's wort. But elderberry mixes fine with those pharmaceuticals. So if that cough syrup is helping you, take that and the elderberry.
Yeah, it's really funny because, I used to take Theraflu. If I'd always get sick on the road, and so I'd always take Theraflu, and just because it's I could eat a truck, and but it's actually typically not a good idea to really treat the symptoms unless you can't sleep or something, because it's if your body is saying I'm fucked up, you don't want to be feeling great, you should be resting.
Yeah.
One of the coolest, my favorite, fun fact that I've uncovered was about settlers in the Americas, and how during whatever settler expansion, you had apothecaries and these doctors with all their pseudoscience, and so rich people would go to the doctor, and the apothecary, the doctor would prescribe them gold tonic as
patent medicine.
Yeah, and
some of that stuff is wild.
But then
or it was just cocaine and opiates.
Yeah, and then the poor people, the people the countryside, the country folk, would have to use elderberries, and they'd actually get better. And so the rich people who thought they had it all figured out we're not healing their ailments. And of course, like, there's all these indigenous uses, which we will probably get into. But yeah, so I just thought that really, like, from like a class perspective, that just made me chuckle. Like, usually you think of, like, the people who have less access to wealth, like, not being able to do so well in those situations. But
sometimes it goes the other way.
yeah, so
maybe a little elderberry botany. Elderberries, no matter what kind they are in the genus Sambucus, and that's where the popular cough remedy, which I have just forgotten the name of, but there's a cough remedy that sounds like Sambucus, and then the most common species worldwide is Sambucus nigra, the black elderberry, and then in North America, we have Sambucus canadensis, being a commonly cultivated species. And there's a little bit of botanical confusion about whether Sambucus canadensis is actually a separate species or it's a subspecies of nigra. They cross totally easily and are very, very similar, so it kind of is an academic point that doesn't really matter. Around here, we also have Sambucus racemosa, the red elderberry, which has pretty similar properties. There's not a lot of information out there about whether they have the same medicinal properties, but they appear to be sort of equally edible. You don't really want to eat the seeds, supposedly, of the red elderberry, so you would want to make more of a jelly out of them. But I've recently read some conflicting reports where some people say they're just as edible as the black elderberries. They do have a totally different season, which is kind of nice. They bloom much earlier, they ripen much earlier. It's sort of a late spring bloom, ripening in the early summer, compared to the black elderberry that blooms in the early summer and ripens like late summer, early fall. But I always appreciate diversity, so I try to grow both. And if I don't get around to harvesting the red elderberries, they're great for the birds.
The Latin name Sambucus, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Is actually like it was an instrument. Did you know this? Like they would make an instrument. I think the Greeks made an instrument from the wood, and that's where the name comes from. So that's it was called like a sambuca or something.
Was it a wind instrument? Because the wood has a really like pithy center. So it has some traditional uses of like a pipe stem or something where you need a hollow piece of wood because you can easily punch out that pithy center. That's cool.
Yeah, it looks like it's a wind instrument.
Cool. Might be a fun thing to do next time I prune elderberries. Make a traditional sambuca.
That's awesome. Well, what about, like, you were talking about the seeds, and what is it? Is it cyanide that's supposed to be? But cyanide's also supposed to be in apple seeds too, right? Is that correct? Yeah,
there's a cyanide precursor in apple seeds. I'm not sure exactly what it is in elderberries, but whatever it is denatured by cooking. So,
even the seeds?
Yep. So you can eat whole elderberries as long as they're cooked. If you're going to make like a syrup or a jam, you might as well strain them out, but you could like have some frozen elderberries and throw them into pancakes or something, and the cooking would denature whatever the toxic element is.
Oh, that's good to know. And
there's no great loss to having to eat them cooked because they don't actually taste very good raw. It's not like, oh, I really want to eat those raw elderberries. They're actually pretty gross raw.
Yeah, they're kind of like bland or something, right?
Yeah, but almost kind of a tomato-y taste to them. But I think they're quite delicious cooked. We usually have some elderberry syrup around, which you can mix with seltzer water, makes kind of a nice fancy drink. You could just take a spoonful of it. Earlier today, Tim and his family had some.
With you, you cooked for us.
I made for Tim and his family some acorn pancakes that we had with elder fruit syrup and elder flower syrup, because both the flowers and the fruit are edible and they have a different flavor.
It was incredible. It was incredible. That was amazing.
My
That was like the
partners
best
also
breakfast.
made elderberry jelly or elderberry blackberry jelly, both super tasty, and you could, eat those however you eat jelly, on toast or whatever, and still get the medicinal benefits just kind of in your food.
I mean, I think another good reason to grow elderberries is because they're native, and so anytime you can grow a plant that the birds love it, it's like we have a strand of it by our house, and the birds get most of it, but we get a bunch too, and so I'm excited to bring some of those into our yard and have more things for birds and humans to snack on.
Yeah, sure.
What's your take on like flower versus the fruit?
I like the fruit better, but unless you only just have a little bit of elderberry growing, it's easy to do both. Obviously, any flowers that you harvest aren't going to turn into berries, but elderberry is pretty darn easy to grow, so it shouldn't be hard to get enough growing unless you're really space limited, that you can harvest all the flowers and berries that you need. And the flowers you can make a syrup out of, but you can also just dry them and use them for tea. And then later, if you want that elderflower flavor in something, you can make a strong tea or a decoction and then use that as the liquid portion if you wanted like an elderflower biscuit or cookie or something.
So if last year I tried to propagate some elderberry from around the corner. I'm going to try it again this year. But if people have some elderberries growing by them and they want to try growing them and once you know what elderberries look like, it's, as an amateur forager, I find they're very easy to identify, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Especially the flowers are so to me unique, at least from what I've seen out here. But what do you have? Do you have anything else to say about that?
Yeah, definitely. So elderberries are really easy to propagate by cuttings. I would say that's the easiest way to propagate them. And they're really easy to identify. The difference between the red elderberry and the black elderberry is a little bit tricky when they don't have fruit or flowers on them. But they're both good, so it kind of doesn't matter. And the black elderberry, which is generally considered more desirable, is much more common. So if you wanted to propagate them by cuttings, you can use either dormant cuttings or greenwood cuttings, depending on what the season is. For dormant cuttings, you can cut them anytime, sort of from midwinter to spring. Ideally, you want to cut them before the buds really start to swell. And then you want to make cuttings that are 2 nodes long. And you'll see the nodes on the stem. They're quite easy to identify and distinctive, and you'll see buds coming out there.
Can I cut you off?
Yes.
So when you say 2 nodes, you say 2 nodes exactly. You don't mean like 2 to 4. You mean just 2.
Elderberry is so long between the internodes, like the distance between the nodes, that a 2-node cutting is usually like 10 to 14 inches long.
Right.
So, yeah, I would usually go for specifically 2 nodes.
So that might be why the ones I planted didn't make it, because there was too much energy going to bud out and not enough going to the roots.
That could be a possibility, although elderberries, because they're pretty easy to root, or very easy to root, I've had good success with single node cuttings, and I've never done this, but they can be propagated with a method called a living stake, where you're taking a cutting that's like 4 feet long and just pounding it into the ground where you want the elderberry to grow. And supposedly people have good success rates with that in decent spots. So they're pretty adaptable, but I think rule of thumb, go for a 2-node cutting.
Awesome.
And so you want to bury that about halfway. And
halfway with like the other bud on the bottom?
Yep, the bottom bud totally buried, and then the top bud facing upwards, unburied.
And will roots grow out of the bottom bud?
Yep. And
that's awesome.
If there is no bottom bud, they will just grow out of the bottom of the cutting, but they grow out a little faster out of that buried bud area.
Wow.
And I would say the simplest way to start them is in a large bucket of potting soil. It's just a little bit easier to keep the moisture in a good sort of happy medium. You don't want them to be totally soggy, but you don't want them to dry out either. And I would put that in the shade outside, and I usually get at least 90% of them to root. But you could also do it just in a nice nursery bed, so like the sort of bed where you would grow annual vegetables. You can stick them right in there. You can start elderberry in water. I'm not wild about starting most cuttings in water, but especially if you just have 1 or 2 cuttings going in a jar of water on the windowsill, that's usually pretty successful. And then you can also start them in the early summer from greenwood cuttings. And you want those cuttings to be at least like pencil diameter and not like floppy. If you take growth that's too young, they tend to just wilt and die. But if they're still like actively growing green, but pretty woody, starting to harden off, those also root quite easily. And those you might want to cover with a clear plastic bag, just so they are in a super high humidity environment. But other than that, they root about the same.
Have you ever heard of elderberry trees? I feel like I saw, again, it might have been my ignorance, but when I was in France, I was under a tree and I was like, this is so pretty. What is it? It was an elderberry tree. Am I tripping?
I don't know of any really tree form elders. They tend to be sort of a suckering shrub, but they can get pretty large. Like, I have one in my yard that's probably 15 feet tall.
Yeah, maybe they just pruned it to be like tree-like or something.
Yeah, so if you pruned them into like a single stem or just a couple stem form, it could totally look like a small tree. Usually for production, you want to prune them lower, multi-stem, and just kind of, you can even just coppice them every few years. And that helps to have a lot of flowers, because the flowers mostly come up at the tips of the branches, and it keeps them more easy to pick and cover. If you have a large planting of elderberries, you'll probably get some bird pressure, and keeping your elders sort of pruned a bit lower gives you the option of being able to cover them with bird netting to protect that if the birds start to get savvy and just eat everything.
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with this also, but in Britain they called it God's stinking bush, and they would use, and like just throughout history, it's been used as an insect repellent. So like dairy farmers in particular would hang elderberry branches around their milk to keep like bugs away, to keep it from spoiling and shit.
Interesting.
And so yeah, I was very like fascinated by people planting elderberries throughout history as an insect repellent. I don't know if you've heard that before, but I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I haven't heard that or noticed a lesser insect activity around the elder plants that I have. But now I'll be interested to give that a try, because repelling flies is always a worthwhile property for plants.
Yeah, I mean, just like for my house, like I like leaving the window open, but the fucking flies, and so it's like, oh, maybe if I hang some of God's stinking bush outside of the door, it'll keep the flies away.
Certainly worth a try. One more thing on cultivation is elderberries do really well in high moisture areas. They don't want to be like in a swamp, but right next to a swamp is usually a great place for growing elderberries. Same with the edge of a ditch. which is kind of nice because most crops that you want to grow, whether they're trees, shrubs, annuals, whatever, usually the first requirement is like well-drained soil. So having some options for plants that are happy to grow in like soggy, wet areas is really nice.
I see you like smugly looking at me, thinking about my yard. Yeah, cool. I mean, I'm going for it.
Yeah, so. Elderberries, blueberries, they're gonna love it here.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for whatever helping me find cheap blueberries to put back there as well. I'm very excited to do that. Pemmican. It was also Native Americans used it to make pemmican, which was like a been made with like fat and nuts and meat and
like super high density travel food, 1 million calories a pound, and I haven't really experimented with pemmican much, but it's definitely got a long history, and there's a lot of foods that I'm super excited about. Like those nuts and a lot of the North American fruits that have a long history of being used in pemmican.
Well, what about when I was making elderberry syrup, which is like, it's really easy to do. You just, boil them down. I don't know if you want to talk about how you make it, but one of the things that I kept fucking up, like when you read stuff off the internet, you get all this information. And they say, like, to make sure you take the stems off because the stems are toxic. Do you, like, when you're making elderberry syrup, are you, like, making sure? Because to me, like, taking the stems off is almost like the most pain in the ass part of doing that.
It's mostly my partner that makes the elderberry syrups and jams at my house. I don't think... we have taken the tiny stems off, like the little bitty stem that attaches the berry to the like cluster. There's definitely some of those that stay on, or kind of are in the like sort of chaff. One method that we have used with mostly successfully is freezing the whole umbel, so like that big cluster of berries. You harvest the whole piece, and you put it on like a cookie sheet in the freezer, and then when it's frozen solid, you smack it on the counter, or probably better into like a really big mixing bowl, and all the frozen berries just break off.
That's awesome.
And then you've got like the thick like stems that make up the umbel, and that goes in the compost, and then all the berries, usually with several of the little tiny stems still attached. Those are like ready to either pack up and put in the freezer to work on later, because usually in the summer we've got a lot going on, so often we'll freeze fruit that needs to get processed and then actually do the processing in the winter or late fall.
That's an excellent life hack. Thank you for that. I don't know. You didn't watch The Witcher on Netflix.
No.
I think it's the elves. The language they speak is Elder. I just thought that was funny. I don't know if that's like a common mythological thing that like, or if, that like elves speak Elder. I don't know if it was just from that movie or. I
don't know, but the elder plant definitely has a lot of lore around it, being sort of connected to the ancestors. So in some traditions, it's like bad luck or frowned upon or taboo to cut an elder plant because it's seen as being disrespectful to the ancestors. So that's not a piece of lore that I follow personally, because I'm always making cuttings and pruning and all this stuff that would be taboo in some societies or whatever. But I do see the elder plant as being really special. It has a lot to offer us, or they have a lot to offer us as humans, and I really enjoy growing elder and propagating and helping other people to get them going.
I mean, another thing that I like, of It was just like just looking up all this shit. And one of the things that I thought was interesting. Well, we can just wait till that's done. One of the things. Sorry, there's some repairs being done on our fireplace. Was like all these other weird uses it's been used for throughout history. Earaches, toothaches. I don't know if there's really any, like, it doesn't seem like people are still using them for those things, so it could have been some, bullshit from the past that's like,
Yeah, not all traditional uses necessarily make sense in our modern world, and we can kind of pick and choose what herbal medicines we continue to use. But I do remember doing some research with an herbal medicine group that my friend Angel used to run, and we kind of did a bit of a deep dive on elderberry and looking through some old herbals. There were specific uses for every part of the elderberry plant. So nowadays, most people pretty much use the flower and the fruit, and I'm with that. But in the past, people have definitely used the leaves, the bark, the roots, all for separate uses. And what most modern sources will say is that all those parts are toxic. Like with any medicinal thing, the dose makes the poison. So maybe there is something to these traditional uses of other parts of the elderberry plant, in the proper dose. Who knows?
I was like you were talking about the bark. I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but in Delaware it was the Lenape. Is that correct? The Lenape Indians?
I think that's how it's pronounced. I'm not an expert.
But they would poultice the bark scrapings onto sores, swelling, and wounds. And, so I thought that was interesting. And then the Mohegans used elderberries for jaundice and liver complaints also. And then further south, the Homa Native Americans used the pounded roots as anti-inflammatories and fermented berries to make a therapeutic tonic, and they pounded the bark and made an analgesic to relieve pain. So
wow,
all cool things to try. Another thing I discovered was it was also tested against Ebola and showed good results in fighting Ebola, and like you can go online and like look at the the way the cells responded to elderberry, and it stunted the growth of Ebola, which I thought was cool. Yeah,
elderberry wine is another classic use of elderberries. I don't really drink alcohol, so it's not something that I've experimented with, but I've definitely seen other people with like a carboy of elderberry wine bubbling away on their counter, and that's definitely something people are into.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was just doing an interview with my friend, with a veteran comrade, Scott Olson, and he has a land project in Wisconsin. And after the interview, he was telling me, he's like, I was drinking elderberry mead that whole conversation. He's like, my neighbor just has rows of elderberries that he uses to make mead. And so just like, I mean, you don't like alcohol, I don't mind it. But that seems like a pretty medicinal form of alcohol.
Yeah, for sure. Just another way that you could incorporate the medicinal value of elderberry into something that you enjoy consuming anyway.
Yeah, my sister makes incredible mead. It's too bad you don't drink alcohol, because she would trade for you some of the best alcohol you've ever had in your life. Another thing I discovered was like a polyculture or something that grows naturally with elderberries is a jelly fungus. It's called Auricularia judai, a type of tree ears that were eaten. Anyway, they were eaten by tribal peoples, harvested year-round, fresh or dried, and this particular jelly fungus is beneficial for heart and lungs. And so now this kind of jelly fungus is like sold as like a gourmet ingredient. And, so that's like another whatever companion plant that will naturally occur is like, if you know what this kind of jelly fungus looks like, it's also a medicinal and gourmet ingredient.
That sounds really cool. Most of the jelly fungi and wood ear type fungi that I know of are saprophytes, so they grow on dead tissue. So maybe that is something that occurs on elder wood. I'd have to look into that. But that's if that is the case, that's really cool. Because most of what like actually grows in a forest garden is cellulose plant material that you can't actually eat.
You mean by fungus? When you say cellulose plant material, I don't know what that means.
Okay, so cellulose is like what the cell walls of plants are made of. So sticks, leaves, wood, all that stuff is like, that's the bulk of what is actually being produced in the ecological system of a forest garden. And by having some fungi that break that stuff down, it returns those nutrients to the soil, improves the soil, and if there's something that you can eat or medicine that you can make from those fungi, that's really awesome. So having that fungal element as part of that system could be a really great benefit to try and turn some of that material that is really abundant into something that you can eat.
Yeah, it's cool. I feel like that stuff that wood ear jelly shit is growing all over my property anyway, but I'm just like afraid to eat mushrooms because I don't want to die.
Yeah, you gotta know what you're eating. There's a lot of really awesome mushrooms around here that are super easy to identify, and there's like nothing else that they don't have any toxic lookalikes. So I probably have like, let's say 10 species of mushrooms that I harvest on the regular, and I'm really comfortable with. And then there are some common ones that I'm just like, I'm not 100% on that, so I'm not going to eat that. Like parasol mushrooms. I'm like, I'm 99% sure that's a parasol. It's probably good to eat, but I can't do it.
So before, when we were talking about acorns and processing acorns, we were talking about like economics and like time and how like not all of this homesteading stuff always like makes financial sense. But from like having a sick kid and seeing how good elderberry works as far as like a healing thing, one little thing of elderberry syrup out here as a medicinal product is like $20. It's super fucking overpriced and expensive.
Super easy to make.
Exactly.
And elderberries are really easy to forage, even if you don't grow them yourself. And it's not hard to forage enough to make, a quart of syrup that's going to last you all year. And Tim mentioned the flowers. So while the elderberries are blooming is a great time to scope out your foraging opportunities. Because once you know what they look like, you'll start to see them out of the corner of your eye when you're driving or biking or walking around, and just kind of make note of that. If you're a technically savvy person and you have a smartphone, you can like drop a map pin or whatever, and then when it's time to harvest those berries, you'll know where to look, because they really pop out of the landscape when they've got these big white flowers.
That's how I knew. I like got some foraging book and like, whatever. It's like whenever they're blooming in like spring or whatever, okay, come back in a couple months. The only other thing I found that I thought was interesting was that Native Americans' courting flutes and hunting whistles were also made from elderberry stems.
Yeah. And
one of the cool things I loved is how they would dye the berries they would dye the flutes with the berries, so like you make a dye with the fruits, with the branch, and you just have like this dark flute. Like that's cool. That's really cool to me.
Yeah, that's a neat piece of lore and historic use. And yeah, anytime you need some sort of wooden tube, elderberry is a good option to look at because the wood, decent quality. It's like not super strong, but even at a larger size, it has a pretty pithy center that's easy to hollow out.
Yeah, so I mean, like, I don't know if there's anything else to add about elderberries. I don't know if you have any more information that you think people should know about this amazing plant, growing it, loving it, living it.
Not too much. I did do some experimentation with growing European cultivars, mostly because there was a lot of demand for them as a nursery plant. And a lot of the European cultivars have really huge berries, which just makes them really productive and easier to process. And I know, even a little bit south of here, a lot of these European cultivars do perfectly fine. I did not have good luck with them in Maine. So if you're in zone 5 or colder, I would definitely look towards either really local wild genetics or some of the more American type cultivars or cultivars of likely hybrid origin like York or Adams, which do have large berry size but do great up here. And the problems I was having was winter die-off, so like the newer growth that wasn't totally hardened off in the fall would just die, which is kind of a bummer. And then also elderberry borers, which are like a beetle that bores into the elderberry stem. And while I was pruning back some dead stuff, I found some pretty impressive grubs, chewing through the center of the elderberry stems. But I really only found them in the European, and because it's a North American species of insect, I think maybe the North American ones are just more adapted, more resistant to that insect pest.
That's awesome. That's good to know. I mean, yeah, because when I read about the difference online, they say the European ones you can eat without cooking, and they're great for you, whereas the American ones have cyanide. And I don't.
That might be somewhat of an oversimplification, but yeah, the European ones are definitely more domesticated for sure. There is an elderberry farm here in Maine that I know is doing some interesting lab analysis of different cultivars' fruits to kind of get an idea of what the medicinal value of various cultivars is. And unfortunately, the person who I knew who worked there no longer works there. But I'm going to try and track down that information and see if that's something they might be willing to share. At least in, maybe part of the information, because that would be really interesting to learn about.
That's awesome. Do you sell elderberries in your store?
I do. I don't have any for sale right now because everything's frozen solid, but I'll definitely have elderberry plants in the spring. Both some named cultivars and some wild local selections for people who want sort of local ecotype. And if I haven't talked about this before, when I say local ecotype, that just means the specific genetics that grow in this region naturally. So a lot of people are getting familiar with the idea of native plants and how native plants have these special interactions that they've developed over millions of years with the native insects and native animals and all this stuff, and how native plants have particularly good ecological benefits. What a lot of people haven't paid attention to yet is local ecotype. So you might plant a plant of a species that naturally grows in your area, but the specific genetics came from halfway across the continent, and that plant might not thrive in your area because it's, adapted to, Oregon or something. So by planting local ecotypes, you make sure that not only you're planting native species that have these great biological interactions, but you kind of up the chances of that plant thriving in your environment without needing too much help.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's why I'm just going to get them from down the street, take them home.
That's a great way to go.
And then I can call them Tim Holland elderberries.
Yeah, then you get to give them a cultivar name.
I have to wait a couple years on that. But cool, man. Well, yeah, that's all I got. I mean, obviously, I don't know shit anyway. But
no, you
no, I know.
You did your research.
No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, you got any final thoughts on elderberries before we?
No, I think I got all the information I wanted to get in there. I love elderberries. They're awesome. I like to eat them. I like to grow them. Love the smell of the flowers. Yeah, if you've got a spot, especially a wet spot, I think they're a great plant to bring to the garden.
As this podcast will come out in February, and that's right about the time when it's a really good time to be buying seeds. So what, I mean, I'm sure you're going to have a bunch of shit growing. I mean, a bunch of seeds for sale in your store come February, or no?
Yep. I'll have a wide variety of all sorts of seeds available at edgewood-nursery.com. Also a lot of cuttings. I'll see how my elderberry plants look, and maybe I'll try and offer some special elder cuttings along with the release of this episode. So try and time that out. But I'll definitely have hardy kiwi, willow, probably some other cuttings, and also tubers for planting available on the website.
I mean, I've never ordered cuttings online. Is that an easy thing to do, like to take a cutting and root it?
It depends on the species.
Like hardy kiwi. Like I keep seeing like hardy kiwi cuttings that are very affordable.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I've never done that before.
Hardy kiwi, I would say, is a moderate one. It's not hard, but it's not easy either. Willows, a lot of ribes, and
ribes are like currants.
Yep,
and
currants, gooseberries, especially black currants, and elder are all easy. Like I would expect even someone who has no experience to get at least 3/4 of them to root. And because you're ordering something that doesn't have a lot of labor into it, they're much cheaper than buying a plant that someone's been taking care of for 6 months or a year or 2 years.
So that's a really cost-effective way to fuck around with some of this stuff.
Yeah. If you want to like do the work yourself of doing the propagating, then you pay less money, you pay a little more time.
Are you selling nodding onions in your store?
Yep, I have nodding onion seed, and then once the ground thaws, I'll have plants available too.
That's a very exciting plant that I'm really looking forward to growing this year.
Yeah, nodding onion's amazing. The first time I dug up the actual onions, I was shocked at how large they are. For a wild perennial onion, it's got a pretty decent sized bulb on it.
And that's like, as far as indigenous onions go, that's kind of like the best one for North America, right? Would you say?
It depends on what part you want to eat. So, like, people are really into ramps. That's a really nice, like, early spring onion, but you're mostly eating the leaves. And then the nodding onion, if you want it, like, if you have a patch of them and you want to harvest some roots, it's a great bulb.
Really? It has a bulb?
Yeah.
I thought it was just just like a chive.
No, the bulb actually gets like yay big. I'm showing Tim with my hands, but an inch and a half in diameter ish. If they've got some decent room to grow.
And those grow under the snow too, right? Like you can pick them any time.
Yeah, I think now they're probably not really available, but like into November, I could still go out into my garden and pick green nodding onion tops. So they have a much longer season than pretty much any other native allium.
Didn't mean to hijack the conversation.
No.
I just was like thinking.
I'm down to talk about plants all day if you want.
I was just looking at my seeds and I was like, fuck, I didn't buy any nodding onions off of you, I don't think. And
I got plenty left.
And I just was like, that's a plant I just want to have all over my yard.
Yeah, and they're beautiful, tasty, nice edible flowers. Good
yeah,
for
they have like a pretty purple umbrella thing.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a great plant. Not technically native here, but native as close as, like, Vermont. So, pretty much close enough in my book.
Yeah, I didn't, no borders, man. The birds and the giant sloths didn't recognize the borders when they shit across the continents.
Certainly native to this bioregion.
Cool, man. Well, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we call that a wrap.
All right. So that's Elderberry. If you got any questions for us, feel free to, pop them in.
Yeah, if you have any questions, send us an email, or ideally record your question or comment or story about elderberries on your smartphone and email us a voice memo of it. That'd be super cool.
Yeah, no one's done that yet. Be the brave soul that steps forward to share us your elderberry wisdom, because I'm sure someone out there has it. You can send it to soleone@soleone.org, and to Aaron at
edgewoodlandscapes@gmail.com, or find me on Instagram as Edgewood Nursery or Facebook as Edgewood Nursery.
And yeah, I didn't get a lot of comments about stinging nettle other than that people just enjoyed the episode and learned a lot about it.
Yeah, I think someone sent a recipe for a soup that sounded pretty cool. Maybe we could share that out somehow.
Yeah, that's a good memory. I'll post it was a comrade from Russia who shared a recipe that involved sorrel and stinging nettle, like all kinds of great perennial things. So yeah, I'll just post that up in the show notes so that people can get it, because it had you put a raw egg in there. It was looked fucking crazy, but also really hearty and looked like really nutritious.
Yeah, I definitely want to try that soup, because I am a competent cook, but often don't try new things when I should.
That's awesome. Well, remember, plant of the month is dead. Long live propaganda by the seed.